Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's tonight for us here on the East Coast. I'm Ranger Jen. I'm here with Ranger Bethany. We're excited to join you tonight for another in our Teach 250 series. We'd love it if you would introduce or say hi and let us know who's here and maybe where you're from. And looking forward to making this as interactive as possible. We may even have the capabilities of having you unmute and talk to us a little if you would like tonight. So please introduce yourselves in the chat for now, and we look forward to a little bit of a dialogue here tonight on the subject of Benjamin Banneker. I will admit, this is not a subject that we spend a lot of time on the mall talking about. But we were really excited to learn a little bit more and thought that it fit in really well with our Teach 250 theme. What we were hoping to do with this series was highlight stories that could relate to your classrooms and maybe fit in with the idea of the the 250. Oh, I see I have a lot of friends on the line. Excellent. Yeah, this really fits with what we had hoped our Teach 250 would be all about. The idea of celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence coming up next year, but also highlighting some of those stories that maybe we don't know as well. And this is a neat opportunity to do that. And this is going to be a little maybe a little less formal than some of our presentations that we've done before, but I wanted to take you through a little bit of our thought process in developing a program that we had done about Benjamin Banneker quite a few years ago. But what I'd really love is if you have any feedback for us, because you know, we have found, as you'll hear me say here in just a minute, that our best ideas are when we work collaboratively with teachers. And we have a lot of variety of folks here tonight. So this is really fun. And we would really like, your opinions and your input. And we think this person in history, Benjamin Banneker, is a great way to engage students with his story and a lot of different subjects. You can almost cover any subject you want and tie Benjamin Banneker's story to it. So we're going to go through a little bit of his story, a little bit of how we tried to learn a little bit more about him, and the process of maybe what it's like for park rangers stumbling their way through developing curriculum and trying to engage area students. So I will get us started here, but please feel free if you have questions along the way, please let us know. Please offer up any suggestions that you have, and we'll see how this goes. So I'm going way, way back to the summer, I think. I've got my chat box in the way here. Yeah, summer of 2004. Ranger Jen was a young ranger at the time, and had just had this brilliant idea that we were going to engage local teachers. And so we brought some teachers out to the mall, and we were talking to them about the kind of programs we could offer. We were finding that local students weren't coming out to the park, and we wanted to figure out the best way we could engage. And one of our most popular programs that we do every year came as a result of this program we have coming up at the end of the month. If you happen to be local, we have a school that's in Washington, D.C. that has been coming out to have students recite the I Have a Dream speech for the last 20 years. This is going to be 21. We're super excited to keep this tradition going. If you are a local school and you want to bring students out, we can do it on a whole variety of occasions here. We open it up to anyone who's interested. But this same school has been coming for the last 20 years. And so that idea was developed during this first teacher workshop that we did way back in 2004. See Ranger Sonia in this picture, who now works out in Colorado or Utah, maybe, I think. Anyway, it was in this group of teachers that we were talking with one day. And one of the women was talking to us about her students in DC, a group predominantly of African-American students. And in 2004, Dr. King's Memorial hadn't been built yet. And she said she had a hard time connecting her students to the sites on the National Mall because of it all being about presidents and about, predominantly dead white guys. And that got us thinking at the time about how could we make this place seem like, kind of think about ways to engage other stories and make students of all backgrounds feel welcome in the park and find a connection to some story. And so we got thinking about Benjamin Banneker. I admit I didn't know a lot. And we do actually have a section of the park. There's a little area in the park known as Banneker Park. It is not a place that you'd really think to bring students out to. It's kind of off the beaten path of the mall, but it is a part of our park. And his story really fits in with the creation of Washington, D.C. And a lot of our D.C. third graders were studying the history, still do, study the history of D.C. And so it got us thinking about Benjamin Banneker and his history and how could we engage students maybe in his story, someone who was a little lesser known figure at the time and might have some really interesting connections to D.C. So we set out on a mission. We were going to learn all about Banneker, and we were going to find a way to tell this story in an engaging way to get our students involved. So we started, well, I'm going to share this with you later, but here's a nice image of him that was done, a mural that was done in one of the DC office buildings, and some links of places that I can share with you later about his some lesson ideas for you. But Banneker's first big kind of project that sort of claim to fame, I guess you could say, was the fact that he grew up in Maryland outside of Baltimore near Ellicott City, and he was a free Black. So he had family who had been enslaved, but his parents were free, and he was born free, and they had farmland. And so he spent time as a farmer. He was very involved in the orchards and the planting, and he even was a beekeeper. So he did all those kinds of things around the farm. But he also found himself at a pretty young age, in his early 20s, found himself a watch that he was able to take apart and then put back together and then create his own clock. And this would have been like a major accomplishment for someone to be able to build their own clock. I have no idea if this is what it's really looked like, but the problem with going back to somebody from the mid 1700s is that we don't have a lot of images. And apparently this clock lasted a good long time. Banneker, not to jump ahead in the story though, Banneker's house soon after his death burned, and so a lot of his materials and possessions went with it. But the clock supposedly lasted for like 40 years and would still chime and ring and keep good time. And as someone who became a pretty known for being a scientist, it was important to him to have a good timepiece, and this apparently was it. So first thing, we're thinking about Banneker and we're thinking about, wow, this dude, he figured out how to make a clock, which is pretty impressive. He would not have had a lot of education. He was more self-taught. He did do a little bit of school, and his grandmother, who came from England originally, would have taught him reading and things like that. So he did have a bit of an education, but a lot more on the self-taught side of things, which is a great story too, to be able to share with students about this this man and his ability to teach himself and to want to learn on his own. So this was our plan. We're like, this is great. Banneker was into clocks. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create some kind of program where kids have to put clocks together. So I go out and buy, and I wish I could have found one before we did this. I must have hid them all somewhere, because I bought a box of these plastic clocks that kind of look like the one here. I don't know. I just remember us in the office spending weeks trying to put these clocks together because I don't think they came with directions. And so we all really felt like Banneker, like, oh my gosh, how did he do this? Because we could not put these clocks together, and we were all working on it at different times of the day. And our plan was we were going to go out to schools and do a ranger visit with students before they came to the park and introduce this idea of Banneker and being able to develop his own clock. And yeah, we couldn't put ours together, and we thought this is not going to be a good sign if we take these out to a school and we ask kids to put them together and nobody knows how. Um, so I don't think we got very far with the clocks, but that was our intent. And it's a great thing to think about Banneker and being able to have done that himself. Put us all to shame, that's for sure. The other thing that he liked to do was kind of this idea of like what I would have considered logic puzzles. I remember being in elementary school and loving I was in some program where we got to go and do these programs, puzzles. I think our teacher called them mind benders. I don't know if any of you teachers out there, or if any of you who remember, who are my age, remember doing such a thing. But there were these like logic puzzles where you had to kind of read the clues and figure out, eliminate choices, right? Yes or no, or X's and checks and things. And I still today like to do these kinds of things. So Banneker would have done things like that. He loved equations and puzzles and things like that. And so the idea of, having a logic puzzles, I think that's what we ended up doing as our ranger visit before the program, instead of trying to put clocks together, was something like this, where they had to figure out the order of, it was some similar type puzzle. Something else I think, as far as a skill you might use with students, as far as in honor of Banneker, was his idea of the of observations. I know I've been working with some teachers who have been very involved in the idea of journaling and having students observe things. I've never been a full-time classroom teacher, but I got my education degree at college, and I had to do a science course where I went out, and we were supposed to go like once I don't know, every couple weeks, and go to the very same spot and observe the same spot. So I would go in college under a tree every few weeks and have to look and see, as the seasons changed, and document the differences. And I think Banneker would have been someone who would have been really good at that kind of observation and details. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can look at Banneker's, career and the kind of tasks that he liked to do, and equate that with what we could do with our students, and honor him in that way. So that was our goal for like a pre-visit. We thought, okay, we could do this part, and we could introduce him as someone who maybe didn't have a ton of education as far as, in a classroom, but stressed his willingness to learn and his eagerness to try new things and to observe the world around him. And so a lot of different subjects that you could tie to Banneker. What else have I got in here? So as good program and content developers, we said, you know what? We need some help on this. We need to learn a little bit more. So instead of just relying on our own information, we decided to take a trip, a few of us, to the Banneker Historical Park and Museum, Catonsville, Maryland. Again, this was years ago. The fella in the picture talking to the docent at the park there has not worked in DC with us for a very long time, but was with us when we went out and did this. And we were really excited because we knew that Banneker had a connection to Washington, DC, and we were thinking about our third grade curriculum, and we were thinking about having him, learning about surveying, because the talk that we had read about was that Banneker had been involved in the survey of Washington, DC, as they're laying out the city of DC. And we thought this fits in perfectly with DC history. And this is going to be great. So we're going to learn all about this. And maybe we could even have kids do some surveying. This will be awesome. So we go to the Historical Park and Museum. That house is a reconstruction because, as I said, his house had burned down like almost immediately after his death. But the grounds and the land is some of the family's land. And we were, of course, very surprised to learn that when Banneker participated in the surveying of DC, he wasn't actually out there with the chains, pulling the chains. He was doing the work of essentially an astronomer. He was looking up in the sky to figure out where the boundaries of the city should be based on the calculations of the stars and the moon. And so we had this great plan in mind where we were going to talk about surveying and pull out the chains and do all of this. And it turns out that actually wasn't the role that Banneker played. So we had a lot to learn in this process. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you have this great idea and you think it's going one way, and then it doesn't. So I had reached out. I had talked to my friends at Mount Vernon. I had found a historical surveyor, this guy Willie, who is awesome. Maybe you've met him. He's at Colonial Williamsburg for many, many years. Excuse me. He's worked down at Jamestown. He's done a lot of great stuff. He goes into first person as a first person historical figure, and he talks about surveying and he shows you the chains. And we brought him to the mall to teach us all about surveying, until we realized that Banneker didn't have that role. And so we all had to rethink how we were going to do this. We ended up going with the surveying aspect and still having kids use the equipment. And we bought some old replica historic surveying equipment. And actually, Bethany was much better with it than I was. I was not a very good surveyor. It involved math, and science is not my strong suit here. And what we did was we would split up a group, and we would have half of them out on the monument grounds with the chains and the compasses and figuring this all out, while the other half went up into the monument and got to see kind of the result of the surveying work. Hey, look, here's Washington, D.C. as it is today. And so that was kind of the view that you got to see. So that was a fun time. We got to incorporate a little bit of our city and our modern day with our history. But yeah, big surprise. Banneker wasn't out there yanking chains and playing with the compasses. And so that altered our plans a little bit. His role would have been in helping Andrew Ellicott, who was the guy who brought him. And this is even a really cool story. Andrew Ellicott was his neighbor essentially in the suburban Baltimore area, and recognized just how smart he was and just how good he was at calculations and figuring and astronomy. And when it came time for him to be appointed to go help with the survey of DC, he asked for Banneker to come with him. At this point, Banneker's almost 60 years old, maybe over 60 years old, and had never really left the area that he lived in. He had never had a reason to really travel anywhere. So him leaving Maryland to go to DC was a really big deal. And their role would be he would be looking up at the sky. So while everybody's doing work during the day, he would be sleeping, and he would be at night looking up and marking calculations to try and decide where the places should go. Excuse me. Bethany, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
No, I think you said it really well. Yeah. So Banneker's spending most of his time at night, looking up at the stars, using, sort of an astronomical clock to sort of calculate longitude and latitude. And the whole goal was to create sort of this 10-mile square and to place these what are called boundary stones. And I think Ranger Jen has a photograph of that coming up, right? At certain intervals. And this would allow them to plot the overall outline of the city. And one thing I kind of will add is that, Washington, D.C. is a planned city. Not only was the boundary sort of mapped out, but there were different lots that were surveyed and plotted within Washington itself. And so kind of, again, sort of that thinking of why we were having students use the surveying compass, as well as the chains, was to try and to get them to sort of understand that, most of the district itself was at one point surveyed, like many of the, early cities was. And so while Banneker himself might not have been doing that actual part of helping to establish the federal city, it was his calculations that were very instrumental in getting all of that started.
Thank you. So the spot that he would have spent, this would have been 1791, and he would have come with Andrew Ellicott, for about 3 months. And he would have stayed at the bottom point of our little triangle here. If you're from this area, you may know it as Jones Point in Alexandria. If you've ever ridden over the Wilson Bridge, I believe it's right under the Wilson Bridge, Jones Point. And that's what my next picture will take us to. This is part of the around where the I think this falls under the George Washington Memorial Parkway, but it's right on the edge of the river there at the Jones Point Lighthouse. This is built much later, but gives you an example of one of those boundary stones that Bethany mentioned. And yeah, they would go all the way around and make that 10 by 10. I do have it here somewhere. There it is. There's our map of the boundary stones. And I don't know what year this guy's looking at it, but it just makes me laugh. So I put him in there. I think I liked his hat. But you can see that some of these stones, I don't know, you don't happen to know, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I think I read it somewhere about how many of them still exist versus how many, I mean, there are a lot still out there of these boundary stones. Some of them are in very hard to reach places, but this one looks like one that had been saved pretty well. I wonder if it's still there. But if you're, I saw somebody has a blog, I think, about going and visiting all of them. And so if this is something you're interested in, you could go find all of the boundary stones that are still around out there. But it's cool to think that Banneker would have had a role. And this picture I put in here, because this is, oh, goodness. This is one of his astronomy drawings. He was actually working to predict when an eclipse might happen. And so this is one of his drawings. And it's really fun that a lot of his, Bethany was online, found a lot of his work that has somehow managed to, because he printed some of his work, has lasted through the years. But to see his handwriting and to see his drawings, and I mean, just to think about the kind of work he was doing, and not because, you know, work he's getting paid for, but work that he was just interested in learning and wanting to know more about the world around him. I feel like that's a great lesson for our students to understand that you know, learning for the sake of learning, I think is a pretty cool idea too, which we don't take advantage of enough. So we did it. I didn't do it very well, but we did get the compasses and we got them out there. And there's Ranger Chrissy out there with the compasses and the kids. She looks pretty serious on that compass, doesn't she? She's figuring it out, and they're working it out to figure out how they would have done the surveying. And I don't know, I don't remember it. It's been so long, but you had the chains that went a certain length, and that would be the way that they could figure out the boundaries of the city. And this was a great hands-on activity, you know, to really get kids to think about how this works. We've had some trouble. I think our compasses are maybe not as accurate. Doesn't the needle kind of sway a little bit in the wrong direction now? But we did do it for a while, and we usually, as I said, combine it with a visit to the Washington Monument, which also got to be problematic over the years because it had to keep closing for various reasons, earthquakes and whatever. But it was while it lasted, it was a really fun thing to introduce this character of Benjamin Banneker to students through the use of the kind of work he would have done, although not exactly the surveying part, but his role in it, and just the love of learning and the different skills sets that he would have used, you know, science, astronomy, calculations, all of that. Pretty neat stuff. I didn't want Bethany to feel left out, so I made sure to include her as well out here doing the surveying thing. Gotta love that we had to bring the little bench out for the kids or the little stool so that they could do the surveying. But it was really fun, and maybe this will inspire us to find a way to get back out there with our chains and compasses, because it was a fun way. So to engage kids with this history. I mentioned Banneker, his calculations, and his pretty nice handwriting. So I wanted to just share a little bit of that and show off the almanac. And this is another element that is pretty impressive. And what we had planned, I don't know that I ever actually made it happen, but what I had planned was for the post visit to be having kids write their own little almanac. And I had planned to kind of lay it out with you know, maybe not so much as a fill in the blank, but like, you know, hey, here you would write a poem, and here you would write, you know, your favorite thing about your field trip, or, you know, kind of different ideas, or maybe here's a math problem to solve. But in any case, the idea would have been to highlight the idea that Banneker as an African American, was, excuse me, out there writing almanacs and doing all of this work. And, this wasn't being done by a lot of others at this time, and that he would fight hard to get himself published. I was just reading about it in this book, this biography of him, and he had to go to multiple publishers, of course, to get his his almanac done. And it's a huge accomplishment that he would have been able to do this. And it gets published in multiple states. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And it would happen, he would be able to keep it going for a number of years. We were trying to figure it out. Excuse me, at least 6 years of going over the calculations and being able to continue this. So this is another angle of the story that I think we probably are most interested in, being that we tend to get into the history angle of this. But Banneker's publishing this almanac, or trying to get it published, and he one day just decides, like, I'm going to send this to the Secretary of State, who at the time was a fellow named Thomas Jefferson. And he's going to decide that he's going to write to Thomas Jefferson, send him a copy of his almanac, and question him a little bit, because Banneker made some friends in were they abolitionists? It was like a Quaker group, right, that he was friends with. And so it got him thinking about the idea of slavery and abolition. And it wasn't something that touched him personally as someone who had never been enslaved, but certainly around him, he's going to see that life was different for different people. And so he's going to write this letter to Thomas Jefferson. I kind of wonder if he thought he was going to get an answer or not. But he did. And I don't know that I want to go and leave the whole thing out here, but it's pretty impressive what he writes. Oh, thank you. Oh, goodness. No, I'm okay. Okay. So where's the part that I wanted I mean, this is a bit of a long letter, but there is, I'm gonna go one more. So Jefferson had written in his notes on the state of Virginia that he didn't believe that folks who were enslaved were of equal capacity, that they would be able to achieve the same things. And so he really believed that that there was an inferiority there. And so Banneker wanted to prove him wrong and wanted to send him this almanac and say, look, as a person of color, look what I achieved. Look at what I accomplished. And so why can't I get this to work? I love in this part that he calls on him as he was thinking about the revolution. Suffer me to recall to your mind that time in which the arms and tyranny of the British crown were exerted with every powerful effort in order to reduce you to a state of servitude. Look back, I entreat you, on the variety of dangers to which you are exposed. Reflect on that time in which every human aid appeared unavailable, and in which even hope and fortitude were the aspect of inability to the conflict. And you cannot but be led to a serious and grateful sense of your miraculous and providential preservation. This, sir, was a time in which you clearly saw into the injustice of a state of slavery, and in which you had just apprehensions of the horrors of its condition. It was now, sir, that your abhorrence thereof was so excited that you publicly held forth this true and invaluable doctrine, which is worthy to be recorded and remembered in all succeeding ages, We hold these truths to be self-evident. So calling him out on what he had written in the Declaration of Independence and pretty much saying, you need to figure out a way to stop this. Sir, I suppose that your knowledge of the situation of my brethren is too extensive to need a recital here. Neither shall I presume to prescribe methods by which they may be relieved. Otherwise than by recommending to you and all others to wean yourselves from these narrow prejudices which you have imbibed with respect to them, and as Job proposed to his friends, put your souls in their souls' stead. Thus shall your hearts be enlarged with kindness and benevolence toward them, and thus shall you need neither the direction of myself or others in what manner to proceed herein. So he sends along this his almanac to Jefferson and makes kind of a plug about how about we end this slavery thing. And Jefferson responds fairly quickly, I think, too. Doesn't wait too long. And I think we have Banneker's too, but I thought it was too long, so I put come back. The response that Jefferson sends him in 1791. I thank you sincerely for your letter and for the almanac it contained. Nobody wishes more than I do to see such proofs as you exhibit, that nature has given to our black brethren talents equal to those of the other colors of men, and that the appearance of a want of them is owing merely to the degraded condition of their existence, both in Africa and America. I can add with truth that nobody wishes more ardently to see a good system commenced for raising the condition both of their body and mind to what it ought to be, as fast as the imbecility of their present existence and other circumstances which cannot be neglected will admit. And then he says he's going to send it off to his friend, which, interestingly enough, I think they don't know for sure that his friend ever received this, because he found himself in a little bit of trouble over in France. But if you wanted to talk some history, here we have Banneker as a person of his time who is dealing with the issue of enslavement. I mean, he himself wasn't, but he's trying for the betterment of people in that time period to go up against the author of the Declaration of Independence right here is going to be the one day be president and try and make change. So you've got beyond your astronomy and your science and your all of your scientific subjects, you also have history, you also have writing. The idea that Banneker's doing all of this writing, there are a lot of great connections of all of the topics that you might want to incorporate into a class. Oh, where's my chat? Yeah, Susan mentioned the interesting and sad connection that Banneker and L'Enfant were buried in less than what they should have been. Although L'Enfant is now buried at Arlington, Banneker is in an unmarked grave. Yeah, could certainly talk about the grave situation. Boy, that's so true. Yeah, thanks, Susan, for mentioning that. Bethany, anything you want to comment on this situation with the letters?
Yeah, so one of the things you can definitely use for connections, if you will, is I absolutely love primary sources. And one of the things that I found is that both of these letters are going to be published in a couple of different newspapers. And it's actually going to be published in 1796 during the presidential election between Adams and Jefferson. And one of the sort of pro-federalist newspapers is going to publish these letters. And there's going to kind of be a response, several different responses by a individual who's using an alias. But today, most historians believe that that was probably Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton's going to kind of call out Jefferson a little bit for being sort of a hypocrite by seeming to agree in many ways with Banneker in his response letter. Yet, if you go back to the notes on the state of Virginia, he has a very different interpretation. And you can go on to the Library of Congress and you can actually find many of the things that Hamilton wrote. And he has kind of some interesting interpretations by, saying that it seems that Jefferson is saying that they're kind of in some ways, because of the circumstances of being enslaved, there's no mechanism to, to better their circumstances, I think is what Jen said, and I think is what Alexander Hamilton said. But because there's no mechanism, there's no way to end slavery, if you will. And so yeah, so there's some really good interpretations of this letter. There's some fascinating some insights into it. And so I think if you want, we can probably find some links that we can give you so that you can actually look at some of these letters, some of the articles that were written in some of these newspapers. And so if you kind of look at the, the 1796 interpretation, and then sort of ask your students to compare that to your own interpretation of what you think Jefferson's saying, I think might be a good activity, a good exercise. So yeah, so there's some fascinating stuff, and you think this is kind of a private correspondence between the two, but it's definitely not. This is something that was going to be publicized. It was going to be put out, sort of in the public record, as opposed to being a private conversation between the two. And it's kind of interesting to wonder, I think Banneker sort of knew that this would be, put out to the public. I think in a couple of different instances, he's talking about whether or not he should even publish this in one of his almanacs. He should have these two letters in there. But I always wonder if Thomas Jefferson had any idea that, this would become something, that's out there and would be used against him later on, in some of these presidential elections.
You mentioned when you were looking through the almanacs that you never actually found this correspondence, right?
I never did. So I looked and actually read through all of them. And I don't know if there were some pieces missing from the ones that I was looking at. It seemed to be pretty cohesive, so it didn't look like they were missing pieces, but I never did find it. I did find some almanacs which had parts of the notes on the state of Virginia in it, though. But I didn't find these letters.
Yeah, interesting. He had to have known he was doing this from being affiliated and associated with people who were working towards abolition. I mean, he was doing this. There's no denying he was a smart fella and he knew what he was doing. And yeah, this is a really interesting angle on his life too, to explore this topic. Susan, who was a school librarian, mentioned a book called Molly Banneker about Banneker's heritage. It's by Alice McGill. And I was looking for it because I know I have it here somewhere and I couldn't find it. But yeah, this is his grandmother who was in England. And the story that I heard, I assume it's the similar story, that she was in England and she was working on a farm and she spilled some milk and was going to get herself in really big trouble. So she became an indentured servant and came to America. And that's kind of what starts off the Banneker family. She gets eventually, completes her indentured servitude and becomes, a landowner. And eventually she will, she will have two enslaved people working for her, who she will eventually free and then marry one. And that kicks off the Banneker, the family tree. So yeah, thank you for the recommendation for a book. If you're all looking for books, there are a number of children's books about Banneker in the nonfiction realm, but yeah, that's a good one too. So one other thing I wanted to mention, I know I've kind of jumped around a little bit, but we're trying to think of different things. And Banneker had his hand in everything. He was so into the sciences and the watching, he was a tobacco farmer until he realized the land was, not good for tobacco after a while, and he would stop doing that. And then he would, he had his orchards, he had herbs, he had bees. And one of the things that one of our colleagues in the natural resource department called to my attention was the fact that when he was 17, he noticed the invasion. Can I call it an invasion? I'm not good with my bugs, but he noticed the cicadas had come out when he was 17, and he would kind of keep a record of it. And he's one of the earliest people to realize that every 17 years was when the cicadas would come out. And at first he thought he had to like kill all the bugs because he thought they were going to go after his crops. And I guess he realized that was not the case and that he couldn't possibly kill them all anyway. Again, I am not a scientist, but it's a pretty cool little fact that seems to go very unnoticed, that he recognized 1749 when he was 17. That's when they came out the first time he noticed. And that yeah, the next 17 years, and then the next 17 years, he lived to be 74. He died in 1806. And yeah, really, really interesting figure. The fact he never married, that he was close with his family, he lived with his parents. And he was very involved, I think, in the extended family, and stuck to his land. He didn't travel other than really to go and help with this surveying, which he really didn't survey, but the whole astronomy thing. So there's so many different topics that you can get into if you want to incorporate him into your classrooms. I could, I'd like to stop talking if anybody else has anything they wanna offer up or share. If you wanted to ask any questions, or not sure that I can answer them, but any comments or things you might wanna for the good of the group. I thought I would just share this picture of Banneker Park. If you're familiar with downtown DC, you're looking out sort of on the wharf. This is near L'Enfant Plaza. And we have a sign out there, what we call a wayside, that explains a little bit about him and this park. And it dates back to what, 1967. I also made note here, and if anybody's interested, I could share some of these links. But we were doing a thing on our webpage for teachers for a while called the NAMA Notebook. And we did a whole thing about Banneker, and we have all kinds. I think a lot of the links we talked about, I think, are on that page. So if you wanted to check that out, that's something you could find a lot of these links. But yeah, we're happy to share some of those things too. Questions, comments, anybody? Oh yeah, Susan is one of our DC locals and says she's never been there. Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, it's L'Enfant Plaza and sort of the wharf, so it's not exactly the kind of place you would bring students to for it was much more fitting to have them on the monument grounds trying to survey than it would be to maybe bring them here and have to fight off traffic. That would be kind of not so safe. But this is just one way to take a figure who isn't as maybe well known as he should be. I feel like there's so many skills that he represented. And one of the I was debating whether I was going to talk about it. One of the crazy stories, and I really hate that we have to make up crazy stories about people when the real story is as worthy as anything. But you often hear this story about Banneker being responsible for helping to lay out the map of DC because Banneker is working with Ellicott, and Pierre L'Enfant's the guy who's going to draw out the streets and the plans and everything. But L'Enfant had a bit of a fiery temper, and he served with Washington, and Washington hired him for the job. But eventually he's going to be too difficult to work with, and Washington's going to have to fire him. And you hear this for years. We heard this crazy story that they were able to like save the map of DC that L'Enfant had been doing. And Banneker did it from memory. He was able to, remember the map and be able to lay it all out. And it's just not, there's no way this can be true, because we know that Banneker is only at Jones Point in what's we can know as Alexandria, and he's only there for 3 months in 1791, and it's much later that L'Enfant gets fired from the job. So there's no like way that they could cross paths, and so it's Yeah, it's one of those crazy stories. Banneker was so smart. Like all the calculations and all the observations and all the things he came up with and the almanacs that he's writing and the fact that he's willing to write to Jefferson and you know put the slavery issue out there on the table. And we have to make up a story, or somebody has to make up a story about him having a good memory. It's just a really you know, ridiculous thing. And I maybe shouldn't have even mentioned it, but we can refute it. So that's why I felt like it was something worth sharing. Ranger Bethany, anything else you want to add about this? Did I forget anything about our story? I don't know if it was at all helpful to recount the way we came up with this program, but you know, if anybody has any thoughts or suggestions or ideas or knows how to fix our compass, by all means, let me know. Okay. Well, there's our Banneker story. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm love to hear if anybody's got any thoughts or ideas or comments. Thanks for joining us. And if you're anywhere near where we are, stay warm out there because it's chilly. But I think we had somebody from Florida on, so I hope you're enjoying the nice weather. Very good. Thank you all for coming and have a good night. Oh, we have a really cool experience for you next time. We're gonna have some visitors from across the pond. So they're working they're college professors working on a study that I think you might be interested in. It's related to the Civil War, and so we'll be putting out some info about that very shortly. And hopefully you'll be able to join us next month for our February Teach 250. Thank you, Ranger Bethany, for helping me out. And thank you to the Trust for the National Mall, as always, for hosting us for these events. We really appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a good night.